This is the Scarcity Studios YouTube channel. Please don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe. I really appreciate you joining me today, and we've got some news coming from the West Midlands. The first story in the headline of this episode is about the murder of a 16-year-old boy in Stourbridge at 7 p.m. on Saturday. Police said in the initial statement they arrested 3 people after the murder, and this occurred inside a block of flats just on the high street, and it's in a very busy part of the Stourbridge area, and it's not too far away from Birmingham.
Scarcity at the scene in Stourbridge, where a 16-year-old boy was fatally stabbed yesterday at around 7 p.m. The cordon has just been lifted and there's a large police presence. 3 people have been arrested in relation to this murder.
The incident occurred at 7 p.m. on Coventry Street, and his next of kin have been informed, and specialist police are supporting his family. 2 teenagers and a male in his 20s was arrested, and officers remained at the scene until the late afternoon on Sunday, the 17th of July. When we arrived at the scene, there was forensics, police officers and a large cordon that was removed later on in the day. The latest update to this story is that the police have said in a statement that 4 more teenagers have been arrested for the murder of the 16-year-old. He is still yet to be named, but 2 of them are 19 years old and 2 others are 16 years old. So in total, 7 people have been arrested in 2 days in relation to this murder. 1 was arrested at his home address and 3 others handed themselves in at a police station. The 16-year-old was from the Bartley Green area, which is in Birmingham, and he was stabbed in Stourbridge on Saturday evening. What they have also revealed is that he was taken to Rowley Regis hospital and an ambulance was called, but sadly nothing could be done to save his life and he died at the scene. So he was initially stabbed in Stourbridge, but then somebody, maybe his friends, took him in a car of some sort to the Rowley Regis hospital. CCTV inquiries are ongoing and police are appealing for witnesses. Detective Inspector Laura Harrison from the Homicide Unit said, "These arrests are a significant step in the investigation and we're asking anybody who has any information to come forward. The victim's family have been updated and they will be supported in the ongoing investigation." So I want to send my condolences to the family and friends of this 16-year-old boy, and we'll keep you updated on his identity and the progression of this case. Please pay respects in the comments, and please don't forget to not incriminate anybody in the comment section who hasn't been charged with any offence. Sadly, this is the 2nd teenager to be murdered in the West Midlands in the last month. And on the 3rd of July, Arman Kadia, 18 years old, was shot dead on a canal towpath in the Nechells area of Birmingham. His family paid tribute to him and said that he had a beautiful smile. The police didn't release any information about the murder, so there was no crime scene to be attended, and the 18-year-old was taken to hospital on July the 4th, and the police released a photo, which is all we have available about the incident. His family said in a statement that it's impossible to have met him and not laughed at least once. The moment he stepped into a room, he filled it with joy and laughter. He was the light in a dark room, and he was a comforting hand when you feel down. The death of Arman is a tragic blow to all of us and his family, and we will never forget him. 4 men were initially arrested on suspicion of murder, 3 aged 19 and another aged 33, and now a 5th woman has been arrested as well in relation to the case. West Midlands Police said they are supporting the family at this awful time, and they would definitely keep you updated in relation to the murder investigation. A spokesperson for the force said a 24-year-old woman has been arrested on Thursday, and she and 3 other men, one of them aged 33, were arrested earlier this week, and they are in strict bail conditions as the investigation is underway. So my condolences to the family of Arman, and I'll definitely keep you updated on anything to do with that story, and also check out the website for all the latest updates in relation to any stories that have broke. Staying in the West Midlands in the Smethwick area just outside of Birmingham, police have jailed a man for converting firearms inside his own property. The NCA released the video footage of the moment they raided his property and found firearms, ammunition and also the equipment to convert them. He operated a workshop inside his home in the West Midlands, and he's been jailed today after they raided 50-year-old Ali Reza's home in Madin Street on the 22nd of December 2022. He had purchased 7 of the firearms online from a legitimate supplier, and they were delivered to an address nearby. Police officers found that Ali was under surveillance as he picked up the consignments and took them back to his home. They were found inside a bedroom upstairs, and a makeshift workshop was also discovered with machine tools used to convert guns and make viable firearms. He also had live rounds of ammunition and also ammunition casings. And Ali also had a stolen Volkswagen car parked outside his house. The car was taken from nearby Wednesbury 12 days before and had been disguised with cloned number plates. After he was interviewed by NCA officers, he admitted possession of a firearm and possession of ammunition and theft of a motor vehicle. He appeared at Wolverhampton Crown Court and was jailed on the 10th of July to 5 years in prison. The NCA Regional Head of Investigations, Kay Mellor, said Ali was purchasing blank firers and converting them into lethal weapons. He was engaged in putting these guns into the supply chain in the West Midlands, and we are very happy that he's been jailed for these crimes. And this follows on from an operation that has lasted for 5 years, where the NCA said they've recovered 700 firearms, and most of them were converted firearms. And this is in cooperation with the Guardia Civil in Spain and Border Force Police. They said in a statement that some of the parts come to mainland Europe and they are very easily converted, and criminals like the guns because they are very cheap, and they also look like Glock firearms and can intimidate people and be converted. Converted firearms are responsible for a proportion of shootings over recent years in the UK, and Border Force Police, NCA and the Guardia Civil in Spain work together in order to try to counteract criminals importing it into the country. They called the operation Project Vizard-like, and they said that they seized 703 firearms in the UK, along with 74 arrests, 50 convictions, and 133 premises were raided. In one case, a man was jailed for 11 years after they discovered 26 firearms at his home, and he stored some of them in his 3-year-old child's bedroom. The NCA and their European partners worked with other agencies to gather intelligence and also find the majority of the weapons that was available. Charles Yates from the NCA said this was a significant level of harm that was going to affect lots of people in the community, and each of the 700 firearms could have fell into the hands of criminals and could have resulted in somebody losing their life. Through the course of the project, international cooperation between the NCA and the European officials meant that Spanish partners could counteract and find a lot of different firearms that were being sent to people in the UK in order to convert. In other cases, in different jurisdictions, they also found false details, addresses and bank transactions to mask the purchases. And despite this being illegal, they were sending them to the UK to be delivered to people on the streets and potentially take somebody's life. So I thought some of them stories are really interesting. And in some other news coming from Wolverhampton, 2 teenagers have been jailed for a minimum term of 16 years for the murder of a boy that they believe was a mistaken identity. The names of the killers, Prajit Vidhesa and Sukhman Shergill, can now be revealed after reporting restrictions were lifted by the judge. Shergill was jailed for a minimum of 16 years, while Vidhesa was jailed for 18 years. Footage shown in court revealed the moment that Ronan was attacked in broad daylight, and he was believed to have been yards from his home. This is the first time that court proceedings have been televised from Wolverhampton Crown Court. Ronan Kanda was the victim, and he was stabbed as he walked home, and he was going to borrow a PlayStation controller from a friend at the time. Ronan had just finished his GCSEs, and he was on Mount Road on the 29th of June 2022 when he was stabbed in the heart and died. Earlier the same day, a ninja set of swords and a large machete was collected from a local post office by one of the defendants who brought them online. Vidhesa and Shergill were sentenced at Wolverhampton Crown Court on Thursday, and Judge Chowdhury lifted the reporting restrictions and said they could be named. Ronan's family wore T-shirts that said "Justice for Ronan," and they sobbed as the father read a tribute to his beautiful boy. And the video footage shows his last moments when he was walking along the street, and also when the teenagers came out of the shop and made their approach to Ronan and took his life. So I want to send my condolences to the family of Ronan, and please don't forget to pay your respects in the comments below. I'll be back again very shortly with some more news, and don't forget to follow on social media at Scarcity Studios on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter and Facebook.
Of the murder of Ronan Kanda. You've also both pleaded guilty to the offence of possessing a bladed article, namely a knife, in a public place. I must now sentence you for those offences. You may remain seated until I tell you to stand up. At just after 8:30 in the evening, on the 29th of June last year, Ronan Kanda was fatally stabbed and killed as he was innocently walking along his own street back to his home. He was just yards from his front door when he was stabbed and left to die in the middle of the road. Ronan was only 16 years old. The devastation caused by that cowardly act of running up behind him and stabbing him not once but twice is hard to comprehend, and for his family almost too great to bear. Ronan was much loved by all those who were fortunate enough to have had him in their lives. He was a joyful young lad, always intent on making those around him happy. He was described by his friends as always the one with the biggest smile. He was fun, playful, good at school, and had no enemies. We have heard this morning the powerful and moving victim personal statements from his father, mother, and sister. We have also had read to us the victim personal statements of Ronan's uncle and grandmother. Their loss is incalculable. They describe Ronan as the soul of the family, whose loss has broken them all. Chandra Kanda, Ronan's dad, says that Ronan was his best friend, a Liverpool fan who liked going to the gym and playing pool. He describes his pride in watching Ronan grow into a kind and compassionate boy who always gave money to the homeless and would encourage people around him to do more for charity. He misses his son constantly. Pooja Kanda, Ronan's mum, eloquently expressed the psychological torture she suffers every day at losing her kind and caring son for absolutely no reason at all, and the utter despair she feels upon realising that he can no longer be part of her life. Nikita Kanda, Ronan's older sister, speaks lovingly of him as the glue that held the family together and how he deserved so much more from life. It's no surprise that the depth of their loss has taken its toll on their mental health, with some of Ronan's relatives being treated for depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. Nothing I can say or do today can relieve the pain of that loss. No term of years will seem sufficient punishment to the family for your crime. No term of years will begin to compensate the family for their loss. This case is another instance of the national scourge of knife crime, as a result of which young lives are brutally cut short because of the ease with which lethal weapons can be obtained and used on our streets. The added tragedy in this case is that Ronan was truly an innocent victim. He had nothing to do with gangs, nothing to do with drugs, nothing to do with violence or knives. He had no enemies. He didn't even have anyone that didn't like him. He was just a normal 16-year-old who liked being with his friends, playing football and computer games. He didn't even have an issue with either of you two. He was targeted by mistake, and had you not been carrying knives, that mistake would not have turned into the unfathomable tragedy that it did. So what were the events leading up to Ronan's tragic death? Both of you were at the same school as Ronan, the Khalsa Academy in Wolverhampton. For different reasons, you both and you were questioned about it. What is not in doubt is that by that stage you did indeed have a strong fascination and association with knives. Since about November 2021, you had been buying knives online and selling these on for a profit. The court was shown a sample of the kinds of knives you purchased and resold. Most were frightening even to look at. These were, for the most part, large machetes and swords which have no legitimate use on our streets. It is disturbing that a 16-year-old could so easily purchase such items online. The businesses that engage in this kind of trade should reflect on their facilitation of knife crime and the devastating consequences for the lives of so many. You claimed that after the incident on and posted messages on social media flaunting the fact that he had a lot of cash. A final demand for the money was made in for you, which he did. On the 28th of June 2022, the day before Ronan was killed, you, Mr. Videja, arranged to transfer On the 29th of June 2022, at around 2:40 in the afternoon, you, Mr. Videja, went to your local post office to collect the knives you had ordered and which you would use just a few hours later to commit murder. Sealed down your trouser legs, a large knife each. The arranged transport came to collect you near your home, Mr. Videja, at around 7:30 p.m. He left the club at around 8:15. His friends, of course, not having any idea that that would be the last they would ever see of him. After a few further minutes of driving around the area, you, Mr. Videja, asked the driver of the vehicle to stop at the bottom of Beach Road. By this time, Ronan was walking back along Mount Road to his home. He was walking away from you when you both jumped out the car with your knives and ran towards Ronan. You, Mr. Videja, were in front. Ronan was wearing headphones and listening to music. He had no idea what was about to happen. You thrust the ninja sword towards Ronan's hip. Ronan stopped and turned around. You then thrust your sword again towards Ronan, this time hitting him on the chest. All of this was captured on a domestic CCTV camera system. That system also recorded the sound, and no one who heard it will forget the terrified scream emitted by Ronan as he realised what had just happened. And helping your injured friend. You both ran, jumped into the waiting car and sped off, leaving your friend to die on the street. Passers-by saw Ronan and called the emergency services. They quickly arrived but were unable to save him. He suffered 2 wounds, the one to the chest being 17 centimetres deep. It cut through Ronan's heart and caused unsurvivable blood loss. The commotion on the street led to Ronan's dad to come and find out what was going on. One cannot even begin to imagine his horror at discovering that it was in fact his own son who had just been killed. After leaving the scene, you both then disposed of your outer clothing and the weapons by or in the canal and went back to Mr. Videja's home and carried on as if nothing had happened. You, Mr. Shergill, did inform your mother and your uncle the next day, and you handed yourself in. It must have been an extraordinarily difficult moment for your uncle and your mother to put their sense of doing the right thing above their concern for you and take you to the police station. The jury rejected you murdered innocent young Ronan. By carrying a knife on the streets with the intention of using it, you've taken away Ronan's life and destroyed his family. Your actions have also ruined your own lives and that of your own families, although of course you still have your own lives. All of this pain, all of this grief, all of this misery, spreading beyond your families to the whole community, could have been so easily avoided if you had made the simple choice not to carry knives that day. I turn now to my approach to sentence. You are both now 17 and were 16 at the time of the murder. There is only one sentence that the law allows me to pass for the offence of murder, and that is a life sentence. Due to the fact that you were both under 18 when the murder was committed, the sentence is one of detention for life at His Majesty's pleasure. I am required to specify the minimum term that must elapse before you can be considered for release on licence by the Parole Board. By Schedule 21 to the Sentencing Act 2020, Parliament has determined the starting point where a person takes a knife to the scene and commits murder. For those aged over 18 when the offence is committed, the starting point for the minimum term is 25 years. By virtue of Section 127 of the Police, Crime, Sentencing and Courts Act 2022, which came into force on the 28th of June last year, the starting point for offenders aged 16 at the time of the offence is 17 years detention. The fact that you both took large knives to the scene and that Ronan was killed means that the starting point of 17 years applies. Having determined that starting point of 17 years, I am required then to take into account the aggravating and mitigating factors in each of your cases. Of the statutory aggravating features set out in paragraph 9 of Schedule 21 to the Sentencing Act 2020, the only one of relevance here is that there was a significant degree of planning or premeditation. Whilst Ronan may not have been the intended victim, it is clear that a significant amount of planning went into the attack. Knives were purchased specifically for the confrontation. Whilst it's correct that you, Mr. Videja, ordered several knives from DNA Leisure for delivery on that day, there is no doubt that at least 2 of them were purchased at Mr. Shergill's request in order to confront Pavendeep as planned. You both took steps to wear dark, hooded clothing, taking care to cover your faces with masks. You pre-arranged transportation and drove to various locations where you thought your intended victim might be. The planning may not have been particularly sophisticated or well thought through, but it was, in my judgment, significant, and the attack was far from being spontaneous. Ms Mason, King's Counsel for the Crown, suggested that a further aggravating feature is that Ronan was particularly vulnerable by reason of his age, as he was only 16. Whilst that might be a significant factor in some cases, I do not consider that any particular vulnerability was present by reason of age in this case. You were both the same age as your victim, and any person attacked from behind whilst walking down the street wearing headphones would have been in as vulnerable a position as Ronan then was. As for other aggravating features, it is notable that you both took steps to conceal your offending. You both went to the canal together to dispose of your weapons and outer clothing. The offence was committed on a public street in broad daylight. Distress was caused to a number of witnesses and bystanders. As for the statutory mitigating factors, I need to consider first whether or not there was an intention to cause serious bodily harm rather than an intention to kill. In your case, Mr. Videja, the prosecution submit that I can be sure, given the nature of the weapon, the fact that 2 blows were struck in quick succession, and the depth of the wounds, that there was an intent to kill. I agree with that submission. An attack with a sword as large as the one used, which is thrust first into the victim's back hip area to a depth of 20 centimetres, and then into the front of the chest to a depth of 17 centimetres, cannot realistically be said to reveal anything other than an intention to kill. There was no attempt here, for example, to injure a less vulnerable part of the body, such as the arms or the legs, or to inflict a less penetrating injury. The wounds, including the fatal one to the chest, were caused by deep thrusts with a vicious weapon aimed at highly vulnerable parts of the body. I am satisfied so that I am sure that at the point at which you attacked Ronan, an intent to kill had been formed, even though that intent In your case, Mr. Shergill, whilst there was a shared intention with Mr. Videja to do the victim at least really serious harm, I do not find that you shared the intention that I found Mr. Videja had formed at the time of the attack to kill the victim. You were a few steps behind Mr. Videja, did not land any blows on the victim yourself, and immediately turned around and ran away after the attack. There was no intention to kill in your case. The second mitigating factor is that you are both of good character. You have no previous convictions and had never had any involvement with the police prior to these events. That is something that I take into account in your favour. You have both expressed some remorse. However, you both appear not to be ready to accept full responsibility for your actions. That is consistent with your young age and your current level of maturity. Perhaps as you mature and reflect on what you have done during your time in custody, you will come to fully accept your responsibility for what has occurred. Ronan was, as you acknowledged, your friend, and there has been some recognition of the pain caused by what you did. I make a small allowance for that. A further mitigating feature to be considered is your young age. In the present case, however, your age has already been taken into account in determining the appropriate starting point. You are not at an age that might be said to be on the cusp of the relevant age for a different starting point. Accordingly, no further allowance is made for age. Finally, I take account of all that is said in the pre-sentence reports, in the character references, and what has been said by your counsel on your behalf by way of personal mitigation. In your case, Mr. Videja, I note that your father has played almost no role in your life. You are close to your mother and younger siblings. You are close to your grandfather, and you were deeply affected by his death a few years ago. It is said that you felt lost after his death, and this may have had an effect on your behaviour thereafter. Notwithstanding that loss, you continue to play a positive role in the community. You've shown yourself capable of applying yourself, and I note your recent academic and behavioural achievements whilst in custody. There is some potential for rehabilitation, although I must also bear in mind that you had an unhealthy fascination with knives and were willing to use false ID to obtain and sell them, with no thought as to the consequences for others. You are undoubtedly living two lives, one being that of the good son and the community participant, the other being that of a minor arms dealer, completely reckless as to the consequences of passing on such dangerous items to others, including in all probability other youths and children. In your case, Mr. Shergill, your actions are, by all accounts, totally out of character. You come from a loving, stable home with hard-working parents. You are at the heart of your family's life and regularly volunteered at the Gurdwara. All those who know you spoke highly of your character and kindness. Unlike Mr. Videja, there does not appear to have been another hidden or dark side to your conduct. You were good at school and had much potential to make a success of your life. But you squandered all that. You squandered that potential to make a success of your life by taking the decision that day to use a knife to help you settle a dispute over a small amount of money. The impact on your family, whilst not comparable to the devastation caused to Ronan's family, has been severe. I have borne in mind the sentencing guidelines on sentencing children and current conditions in prison. Balancing these aggravating and mitigating factors, I have reached the following conclusions. In your case, Mr. Videja, the significant aggravating feature of planning, concealment and the location of the offence are balanced out to some extent by your good character and the other mitigating features mentioned. I consider that the minimum term should therefore be 18 years. That is the minimum term in your case. In your case, Mr. Shergill, the additional mitigating feature of the lack of an intention to kill and the other mitigating features, including your good character, mean that the minimum term should be reduced by 1 year. The appropriate minimum term in your case is therefore 16 years. I deal now very briefly with the sentence for the possession of a bladed article. Having regard to the relevant guidelines, the appropriate categorisation of these offences is Category 1A, the starting point for which is 18 months with a range of 1 to 2 years detention after trial. That starting point and range is for adult offenders over the age of 18, and an adjustment must be made to take account of your age. The aggravating features of planning and concealing your identity are balanced out by your absence of convictions. Adjusting the starting point for age, that leads me to a term of 12 months. Credit for your plea reduces this further to 8 months. Accordingly, the sentence in each of your cases for counts 2 and 3 is 8 months, which will run concurrently. Will the defendants please stand? Prajit Videja, for the murder of Ronan Kanda, I sentence you to detention for life at His Majesty's pleasure with a minimum term of 18 years. For the possession of a bladed article, I sentence you to 8 months detention to run concurrently. From the minimum term of 18 years, there must be deducted the 375 days you have spent on remand in custody for this offence. The minimum term is accordingly 18 years less the 375 days. Sukhman Shergill, for the murder of Ronan Kanda, I sentence you to detention for life at His Majesty's pleasure with a minimum term of 16 years. For the possession of the bladed article, I sentence you also to 8 months detention to run concurrently. From the minimum term of 16 years must be deducted the 375 days you have spent on remand in custody for this offence. The minimum term accordingly is 16 years less 375 days. The victim surcharge must also be paid in both cases. It's important to emphasise, so that you and all those who are listening and viewing this sentence can understand the position, that the minimum term is just that, a minimum period which cannot be reduced in any way. After your respective minimum terms are served, there is no guarantee that you will be released at that time or at any particular time thereafter. It is only if the parole board decides that you are no longer a danger to society and fit to be released, that you will be released. That will not be before you have served every day of your minimum term. Even if you are released after serving your minimum term, you will remain subject to licence for the rest of your life. That means you may be recalled to continue your life sentence at any time if considered appropriate. It is in these ways that a life sentence with a minimum term protects the public for the future. That concludes my sentence. You may take them down.